Welcome back to the channel and thank you for watching. So you've probably heard by now the second portion of Amber's interview has been aired. So I wanted to give you my instant thoughts on it, my instant reactions. So I'm going to play that for you and give you my thoughts as we go along. Let's go.
As you sit here with me now, has it sunk in? How could it? Surreal and difficult. In part, yes. This has been a long time coming. Do you stand by?
Difficult in part is an interesting choice of words. One might think that it was very much more than just difficult in part if all of these allegations were true, and she's obviously not been believed by the jury. But let's listen on.
Do you stand by your testimony and your accusations against Johnny Depp about abuse? Of course. To my dying day, will stand by every word of my testimony.
The real-life drama of the defamation case between Amber Heard and her ex-husband, Johnny Depp, captivated millions of people around the world.
Amber Heard just got exposed.
Johnny, you hit me.
This is so cringe.
With clips spreading across social media like wildfire.
I think vast majority of this trial was played out on social media. I think that this trial is an example of that gone haywire, gone amok, and the jury is not immune.
So first of all, it wasn't played out on social media. It was played out in a courtroom under very tight controls. The judge had a very tight control of the trial, of everyone in the courtroom, including the jury, telling the jury what they can and cannot do. And again, making the suggestion that the jury were looking at social media. Now, again, as I've said before, the jury, in my view, are not going to be interested in looking at social media outside of the trial. They are hearing evidence day in and day out. The last thing they're going to want to do is look at yet more material on this case outside of court. Not least of which because they're only going to get two things outside of the courtroom: other people's opinions or other people's recap of the evidence, neither of which are going to be useful because they've heard all the evidence themselves in court and they are being asked for their opinion, not someone else's. So I just don't see that that is of any relevance whatsoever, but let's listen on.
The jury is not immune to that.
You think the jury saw it?
How could they not? I think even the most well-intentioned juror, it would have been impossible to avoid this.
People online.
Even if it were impossible to avoid looking at social media and seeing some of the things online, again, for the reasons that I've said, I think jury members are going to actively avoid looking at it, not least of which because they're told to, but secondly, because surely they won't want to. But let's listen on.
People online and crowds outside the courthouse made it clear where they stood.
Every single day I passed from 3, 4, sometimes 6 blocks, city blocks lined with people holding signs saying, "Burn the witch," "Death to Amber." After 3.5 weeks, I took the stand and saw just a courtroom packed full of Captain Jack Sparrow fans who were vocal, energized.
Can you put into words how that felt?
This was the most humiliating and horrible thing I've ever been through. I have never felt more removed from my own humanity.
I assume that she's saying that the trial was the most humiliating thing she's been through. But again, many others have suggested that the trial would be much less than what she's accused Johnny Depp of doing. And the trial, whilst admittedly uncomfortable for anyone that has been through that, would probably not be described in this way. But let's listen on.
I felt less than human.
Let's go back to the day of the verdict. Were you feeling confident?
That's a great question. I wish I could say yes to that. I want to say yes to you, but it wouldn't be true. Even if you think that I'm lying, you still couldn't look me in the eye and tell me that you think on social media there's been a fair representation.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
After the six
Again, the social media is a reaction to what happened in the courtroom, and it's people's opinion of what happened.
After the 6-week trial, the jury found Heard defamed Depp in a 2018 Washington Post op-ed in which she wrote she was a public figure representing domestic abuse. She never mentioned her ex-husband by name. Depp denied the abuse allegations in court. Heard won just one of 3 claims in her countersuit against her ex-husband. That verdict came less than 2 years after a judge ruled against Depp in a similar case in the UK, in which he sued a British newspaper that called him a wife beater.
There was another trial, dealt with the same substantive issues that had even more evidence in. In fact, mine.
Just pausing there, out of Amber's mouth, her own words, there was another trial dealing with the same substantive issues. But remember, she was not the defendant in the UK trial. And for all the reasons I've previously said, there were issues with evidence being brought into the UK trial with the applications that were made and refused for that evidence.
My evidence was largely kept out. Really important pieces of evidence kept out.
And that's a bit of an odd statement because I think she's still referring to the UK trial. Large pieces of evidence kept out. Yes, there were, but that goes against her, not in her favour, and is one of the reasons that I've suggested that the UK judgment had some issues. But let's listen on.
Done differently, handled differently by a judge instead of a jury.
Some evidence is admissible in a UK.
Okay, yes, I mean, again, handled differently by a judge instead of a jury. The jury came to a unanimous verdict as against one judge, but let's listen on.
Evidence is admissible in a UK court that is not admissible in a US court. Do you think that maybe he just had better lawyers?
I will say his lawyers did certainly a better job of distracting the jury from the real issues.
For some people...
I sort of take issue with that comment because it suggests 2 things. First of all, that the lawyers are trying to distract someone, and distract usually suggests that it's somehow inherently dishonest. So if someone's trying to distract somebody from something, they're trying to divert their attention away from it, there's a certain implication that that might be dishonest there. The second thing is, if someone can be distracted or has been distracted, then it's suggesting that the jury has been distracted in that effort. And there's no suggestion for that. There's certainly no basis for it. There's certainly no evidential basis for it. And so I think that's an unfounded comment, both as against the lawyers and as against the jury. And again, impugning the integrity of the lawyers and the jury. Let's listen on.
For some people, they just were frankly disgusted by the whole thing and don't have much sympathy for either one of you. Can you understand that?
Absolutely. I would not blame the average person for looking at this and how it's been covered and not think that it is Hollywood brats at their worst.
Just pausing there, again referring to how it's been covered, blaming the media, blaming social media. She says, I wouldn't blame anyone who sees this, how it's been covered, to think X, Y, Z. And again, that's not fair because it's the jury that made this verdict, not anyone else looking at media. Again, I've seen people have views, hold views without having watched the trial or heard the evidence in Amber's favour. And so you could use the same arguments both ways, but none of those actually made the decision on this jury. Let's listen on.
But what people don't understand is it's actually so much bigger than that. This is not only about our First Amendment right to speak.
But here's the thing about the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects free speech. It doesn't protect lies that amount to defamation. And that was the issue in the case.
Yes, exactly.
So now going to free speech. So we've had blame the lawyers, blame the media, blame the jury. Now hanging on with free speech. Well, of course, you do have freedom of speech, but that doesn't stop somebody suing you if you say something defamatory. Let's listen on.
Yes, exactly. You can't go into... Free speech does not protect you if you go into a crowded theater and you scream fire. We get the concept of free speech from the Greeks. My understanding of what that means is not just the freedom to speak. It's the freedom to speak truth to power.
The pointing of the finger is sort of accusatory of anyone in power or making a decision over her. So she clearly, her body language says that she doesn't like that. She's resenting the authority of the jury and the court system. Let's listen on.
The truth is the word.
Yes.
And that was the issue.
And that's all I spoke. And I spoke it to...
Interesting body language here. I'm not a body language expert, but I can generally tell when someone's being dishonest with me. There's a lot of shaking of the head when she's trying to say an affirmative statement. Any one by themselves, the behavior panel will tell you that any one by themselves is not conclusive, but when you see a whole pattern of them above a baseline throughout a whole interview, then ultimately you can spot deception. And in my view, this is deceptive here. But let's listen on.
And I spoke it to power, and I paid the price.
In the closing arguments, the Depp lawyer called your testimony the performance of a lifetime and said you were acting. What do you say to that?
Says the lawyer for the man who convinced the world he had scissors for fingers.
That's obviously a reference to Edward Scissorhands, the film, but this is not only twice removed, but it's also a bit ridiculous because, first of all, she's saying that because Johnny Depp was so good at acting in Edward Scissorhands, therefore his lawyer's putting on a performance. It's twice removed in the sense that this has nothing to do with Johnny Depp, the actor, acting. Neither has it anything to do with his lawyer acting because he's an actor. And either way, again, impugning the integrity of the lawyers, which I think is uncalled for. But let's listen on.
I'm the performer. I had listened to weeks of testimony.
Just as a side note there, I'm the performer raised as a question, as a rhetorical, sarcastic question. Well, yes, by your own logic, if Johnny Depp's lawyers were putting on a performance because he's an actor, then, she could be putting on a performance as well as Johnny Depp's putting on a performance, as well as Elaine could be putting on a performance if Camille was putting on a performance. You can't have it both ways. If one party was doing it, you were doing it. I suggest Johnny Depp wasn't doing it, his lawyer wasn't doing it. Clearly the jury came to the verdict that she was probably making up the story, but let's listen on.
Insinuating that, or saying quite directly that, I'm a terrible actress. So I'm a bit confused how I could be both.
The Depp team argued that you were the abuser, that you instigated physical violence. Did you?
I never had to instigate it. I responded to it. When you're living in violence and it becomes normal, as I testified to, you have to adapt.
You say you were responsible.
Just, by the way, this is a shortened version of the interview, but there's also a lot of head shaking here, so clearly not agreeing with what she's actually saying.
But there is evidence. There are tapes in which you acknowledge hitting. There are tapes in which you say, I started the fight.
I know much has been made of these audio tapes. They were first leaked online after being edited.
Just as a side note, in the UK judgment, again, the judge didn't apply weight to these audio recordings, where I feel perhaps weight should have been placed on them. But again, let's listen on.
What you would hear in those clips are not evidence of what was happening. It was evidence of a negotiation.
Just pausing, I disagree with that entirely. They very much are evidence of what's happening. They are live, contemporaneous recordings of precisely what's happening, what's being said, by whom, and when. And it is very much evidence of what's happening. Not sure what she means by negotiation, because there are what at least appear to be admissions, several admissions on different counts by Amber Heard within those recordings. So I don't see what negotiation has anything to do with it.
I've had to talk about that with your abuser.
But I am looking at a transcript that he says, you start physical fights, and you say, I did start a physical fight. I can't promise you I won't get physical again. This is in black and white. I understand context. But you're testifying.
Nodding of the head, she agrees with this
I
portion.
never started a physical fight, and here you are on tape saying you did.
As I testified on the stand about this.
Again, shaking the head. As I testified on the stand, she shakes her head for things that clearly she has a negative connotation with. So she testified on the stand, shaking her head, in a combination of lots of other patterns. I think that's deceptive, but let's listen on.
Is that when your life is at risk, not only will you take the blame for things that you shouldn't take the blame for, but when you're in an abusive dynamic, psychologically, emotionally, and physically, you don't have the resources that, say, you or I do with the luxury of saying, hey, this is black and white, because it's anything but when you're living in it.
But then there are other times, there's another tape where you're taunting him and saying, oh, tell the world, Johnny Depp, I, a man, the victim of domestic violence.
20-second clips or the transcripts of them are not
That's a very good point, by the way.
representative of even the 2 hours or the 3 hours that those clips are excerpt from.
Could your side have just put the...
However, they argued to keep most of that out. So that's quite significant. If the rest of it put it into great context in her favor, then the whole of those recordings would have been in evidence.
Could your side have just put the whole 3 hours in then?
I'm not a lawyer, as I testified to.
Very sharp edit on the clip there. I'm not a lawyer, and then cut off. Obviously, potentially going into the legal reasons as to why they were excluded, which is possibly why it's by being cut out. But moreover, they've just been excluded. One way or the other, they've been excluded from evidence.
I was talking in those recordings as a person in extreme amount of emotional, psychological, and physical distress.
He says he never hit you. He never. Is that a lie?
Yes, it is.
What about the witnesses who said they have seen you instigate physical violence?
I've seen firsthand how people will file rank and support the person they depend on.
Did they all come in and...
There's a look of contempt about her here, raising one side of the mouth. So again, in combination with other signals, there's a look of contempt here. But this is probably going to be an attempt to attack other witnesses' credibility, perhaps without outright calling them a liar, but we'll see.
I'll come in and lie in court?
I am not here to call any of his witnesses any names. I'm here to just kind of talk about it from what it felt like for me as the person who sat there.
When I asked...
there's a lot of facial expressions there which to me come across as being somewhat dishonest, because not only does she know she can't outright say that they are lying, because again that would be defamatory, but I don't get the sense that she truly believes what she's saying here either. Maybe you do too. Let me know in the comments what you think.
When I asked his lawyers, why do you think you won? And the answer I got was, because she never took responsibility for anything she did in the marriage.
This is a really important point, because Ben Chu, of course, you remember, made comments about the jury believing Johnny Depp because he took responsibility for the things that he said he did, whereas Amber didn't. And that was possibly one reason the jury came down on the side that they did.
In the marriage.
I did do and say horrible, regrettable things throughout my relationship. I behaved in horrible, almost unrecognizable to myself ways. I have so much regret. I freely and openly and voluntarily talked about what I did. I talked about the horrible language. I talked about being pushed to the extent where I didn't even know the difference between, right and wrong. I will always continue to feel...
Interesting that she's putting this notion across now that she didn't know right from wrong. Interesting.
Feel like I was a part of this, like I was the other half of this relationship, because I was. And it was ugly and could be very beautiful. It was very, very toxic. We were awful to each other. I made a lot of mistakes. A lot of mistakes. But I've always told the truth.
All right, thanks.
Very, very mixed emotions, mixed messages, mixed statements. I'd be very interested in a psychological view on this outside of the courtroom. And so if anyone is a qualified professional and you would like to jump on the channel, feel free to hit me up in the DMs. But those are my immediate thoughts. My overall immediate reaction is that there's a lot of blaming going on. Blame the jury, blame the lawyers, blame the press, blame the media, blame the witnesses. Very mixed messages, very mixed emotional messages. But from this interview, I just, as the jury, I just don't buy it. I sense that there's a lot of blaming going on. There's still not really any accountability, taking responsibility for those things, or acceptance, or accepting what the jury have said. Those are my initial views. I'd really appreciate it if you smash the like button and the subscribe button. Share this with somebody. Check out all my other videos in the description below. I've done lots of detailed analysis videos for the UK trial. 3 so far, plus extras. So hours of material in there. Please go and check those out. Make sure you subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.